Hi, everyone. Thanks so much for joining. We'll just give it a couple seconds here before we get started. Seeing people trickle in from the waiting room. Awesome. I think we can go ahead and get started. More people as you trickle in. Thank you so much for coming. Thanks everyone for spending your Friday afternoon with me. I like to host Friday afternoon sessions because I feel like it's kind of towards the end of the week. And hopefully you have a little bit more of a lighter schedule today. And so, we hope that this is worthwhile your time. I'm Sanjana. I am a co-founder at Thrizer. And I'm excited to chat a little bit more about with you today about out-of-network benefits. I love hosting these sessions because, it is out-of-network benefits can feel like such a black box. And, I'm convinced that insurance companies kind of do this on purpose. As with in-network, out-of-network can feel like a totally intimidating process for your clients. But, there is kind of a science to it. And that's why I like to host these sessions so that we can walk through it, do the math together. You can walk away with some resources that you can really kind of apply within your practice. And hopefully it ends up being a valuable asset to it. So we'll go ahead and get started here. Just a couple housekeeping things before we jump in. The chat is disabled, but there is a Q&A portion that you'll see in your kind of, box. So if you do have any questions, feel free to pop it in there. And I will kind of pause for questions along the way after each section. I've kind of broken this up into 6 sections. So after each section, you'll be able to kind of, I'll go in there to kind of answer your questions. Let me just make sure that, the chat, can you kind of raise your hand if you don't see the Q&A portion? Because I don't see it on my end. Okay, let's see here. Okay, perfect. Thank you, Paul. Perfect. I can see it here now. So awesome. We can jump in then. Great. And just so you know, the webinar is recorded. So I'll make sure to send it your way today so that you can look back at it along with some resources. So let's hop in. Thanks again, everyone, for joining. Here's our agenda for today. So I'm kind of going to level set with the client funnel. How and where do out-of-network benefits fit into your funnel? Then we'll dive straight into out-of-network benefits. What are they? How do they work? How do superbills work, right? You've probably heard of the term. We're going to really kind of dig deep into that. How are reimbursement rates really calculated? If you've heard of this thing called allowed amounts, you're probably confused on what that is. So I'll try to break it down for you. And then I'll leave you with some tips and tricks as well as some resources. So again, along the way, after each of these sections, I'll kind of look into the Q&A. If you have any questions, I'll kind of try my best to make sure that I answer them. So let's dive in then. Cool. So client funnel, if we think about, what I really mean by client funnel here is there's kind of 2 steps, right? There's attracting clients and and then there's retaining clients. And so for attracting clients, you're probably doing all of these things or part of these things like referrals, you're on directories, maybe you have a website, maybe you write blogs, SEO, social media. There's a lot of different things that you could be doing. So we're not going to really focus on that portion today. What we're really going to be focusing on is out-of-network benefits and how that fits into your funnel. And of course, retaining clients, you guys know it better than I do in terms of clear expectations, tailored approach, all of those things. But one thing that I hear again and again is, and I really empathize with this, is I feel like I'm doing all the right things. People are coming to my website, my paid ads seem to be working, but I'm just not able to convert them into clients. Like I'm seeing the metrics come in, but that final step of, how do we actually convert clients after they hear about us? And that's where, I find that a lot of therapists are getting stuck. And so that's where I think out-of-network benefits can be really helpful. So let's jump into kind of breaking this funnel into this middle portion, which requires a whole different set of tools and tactics. Of course, consult calls, if you offer them, are a great way to, one, for the client to understand whether you're a good fit for them, and then also for you to explain your value proposition and see if they're a good fit for you, right? And so consult calls can be that, that bridging portion of they've heard about you, they've come to your website, they book a consult call, and then now you're able to kind of chat with them and figure out what's happening. But even so, like even after that step, one of the biggest burdens or hurdles that we hear about is affording therapy, right? Maybe that's where you find out that you don't accept their insurance. Maybe you offer them with sliding scale. Maybe you offer them pro bono. Maybe you have to turn them away because they're not able to actually afford your rate. And so that's really the portion where out-of-network benefits can be powerful. It's after they've heard about you, they've come to your website, you have a consult call with them, and starting that conversation about, how are you going to pay for our sessions? Have you heard of out-of-network benefits, right? That's where that really fits in. And it actually also fits into retaining clients. And you'll kind of hear me talk a little bit more about that later on. But that's, really the part that we're going to be focusing on of how can you incorporate out-of-network benefits into your practice so that it can be this powerful financial resource for your clients, even if you don't accept their insurance or you don't accept insurance at all. So before I jump into all of that, any questions? Let me hop into the chat Q&A here. Don't see any questions so far. Ethically, I don't feel comfortable sharing. Yes, I see a question here and a comment here that pops up. Ethically, I don't feel comfortable sharing information about rates after a consult call. That's a great point. You definitely want to be upfront about your rates on your website itself so that they know that, hey, here's your rate. And, we'll talk more about where can you incorporate, out-of-network benefits on your website itself so that they know that this is something you're familiar with, that you'll provide a super bill, things like that. But that's a great point. You definitely want to include your rates for the different services that you provide directly on your website so that, you're able to do that. Is there anything I need to do specifically to qualify to be an out-of-network provider? No, you don't need to qualify to be an out-of-network provider for most insurances. TRICARE is the one that comes to mind where you do need to kind of register or, go through a couple of steps to make sure you are within their out-of-network provider list. But besides TRICARE, I haven't heard of any other kind of big insurances that require you to do anything specific to qualify to be an out-of-network provider. Awesome. Keep the questions coming. I'm going to go back to sharing my screen. Awesome. So let's jump into what are out-of-network benefits, right? There are going to be a lot of words on here, so don't freak out, but I'll break it down for you. So out-of-network benefits, kind of the book definition or textbook definition of it is benefits in a client's individual insurance plan that allows them to receive reimbursement for services from clinicians who don't accept their insurance or are within their insurance network. So what does that really mean? And how is that relevant in this context? This means that even if you don't accept insurance, whether you're fully private pay, or let's say you're paneled with Aetna, but you're not paneled with Cigna, right? And a Cigna client comes to you and they're like, I want to start sessions with you. Do you accept my insurance, right? In that case, you don't accept Cigna, right? So in that case, even if you don't accept that insurance directly, clients can still receive insurance reimbursement if they have out-of-network benefits in their individual insurance plan. And the average savings that we see per session is between 60 to 70%. Of course, there's a lot of nuance into this. We're going to break it down fully, like I'm sure you have questions popping up. What about the deductible? What about allowed amounts? Like all of these things, we're definitely going to jump into all of that. But at a high level, based on the thousands of clients that we've supported at Thrizer, the average that we're seeing is 60 to 70%. Some clients get reimbursed 30%, some clients get reimbursed 90%. So it really depends on their insurance plan, but the average is between 60 to 70% savings per session. So what does that, what does that mean? That means that even if you as a private pay clinician is charging $200 a session, they might only be paying $80 after reimbursement, right? $80 is assuming they get 60% back for that session. In that case, they're getting back 120 as reimbursement. They're only paying $80 a session after that reimbursement. So that's amazing, right? Because you're still getting $200. They're only paying $80. So that's where out-of-network benefits can be really game-changing. But of course, there's a lot of nuance around it. What plans have it? What plans don't have it? What percentage of the population can you actually serve using out-of-network benefits? And so that's the nuances that we're going to go into in this session. So he'll just address those questions off the bat. What percentage of plans have out-of-network benefits? So, it depends on, maybe I'll answer this question along with that. What type of plans have out-of-network benefits? So PPO plans have out-of-network benefits in 99% of the cases. The plans that definitely don't have out-of-network benefits are Medicare and Medicaid, as well as HMO plans. Then there's a subset of those non-PPO, non-HMO, non-Medicare plans that also may have out-of-network benefits, right? So if you do the math based on kind of the people who come to us, which might be a selected group of people, maybe they already knew they have out-of-network benefits, or maybe they already looked into it, or the clinicians have only recommended people who they know have out-of-network benefits. But whatever might be the case, of the people who come to us, about 70% of them, when they check benefits on Thrizer, end up having out-of-network benefits. And that's a pretty good population, right? Also addressing this off the bat, like this isn't a tool that works for everyone, right? And we'll learn more about that. There are high deductibles. There are, some plans that don't have out-of-network benefits at all. Totally valid concerns, but there are a huge subset of clients that do have out-of-network benefits that are leaving money on the table if they're not tapping into them, right? And so kind of my soapbox is always check benefits for a client if you're unsure that they have those benefits or not, right? If you know off the bat that they're a Medicare or Medicaid client, there's no point checking. But if you don't know if it's a PPO plan, or you're not sure how many, what kind of benefits this plan has, always check benefits, because many people are surprised. I was surprised when I found out that I had out-of-network benefits when I first started all of this. So it is something that insurance plan include in their plans because they don't want people to know about it. It's never in the big print. It's somewhere small, hidden, that most people don't even know what they are. And so that's why it's important to kind of educate ourselves as well as our clients to make sure that they know that maybe they do have out-of-network benefits, right? What services or CPT codes can be reimbursed? Pretty much any kind of therapy session. So there's, obviously individual psychotherapy, couples therapy, group therapy, med management, psychological evaluations. So many of them are actually covered by out-of-network benefits. And in fact, the bar is much lower for out-of-network claims in terms of couples therapy, for example, right? I've heard a lot of people are like, in-network can be a little tricky for getting couples therapy reimbursed. We've seen that couples therapy is pretty successfully reimbursed in most cases in the out-of-network setting. And so that's, kind of any service. And if you're ever curious, okay, would this actually be covered? You can always reach out to us. We'll let you know, okay, that is something that typically is covered with this particular insurance plan that we're dealing with. And then how do we know if a client's plan has out-of-network benefits? So the way to know is the client can call their insurance company, or you can call their insurance company on their behalf. And it's going to be stated in their insurance plan that yes, they do have out-of-network benefits, or if they have their their plan details that they got when they signed up for that insurance company. They'll be able to see it on there. They'll usually see that out-of-network deductible and all of that stuff. It can be a pain trying to figure that out. That's why, we'll talk about where Thrizer fits in later, but Thrizer does have a free calculator that you can just plug in the client's date of birth, insurance information, and name, and it kind of spits out, okay, they do have out-of-network benefits. So that can be, a lot easier, but the alternative is to call their insurance or look at their plan details. And so here are two other questions that we will spend the next kind of 20 to 30 minutes talking about. And that is, how do clients access their benefits, right? And that's where the superbills come in. So you may already be familiar with superbills, so this might be a bit of a recap for you. But if you aren't familiar, we'll go much, deeper into it. And then also, how do insurances determine the reimbursement rates? And that's a question we get a lot. So I want to be as transparent as possible about it and kind of give you the inside scoop of what we've seen in the claims that we've submitted and how they kind of navigate and do that. So that's the next two sessions that we'll cover. I'll pause here again for questions. Let me go here to Q&A. All right, answered that, answered that, answered that. Do only PPO insurances offer out-of-network benefits? No, not only PPO insurances have it. The way to think about it is PPO insurance plans will most likely have it, but there are other insurance plans that are non-PPO, non-HMO, non-Medicare, Medicaid that will also have it. And so the best way to know is just to check benefits for them or call their insurance company. So there are some other non-PPO plans that have it. Or they book a company and don't read the information about it that is on the website. Yes, you'll have access to the recording. Hi, you mentioned 3 plans that do not have out-of-network benefits: Medicare, Medicaid, and HMO plans. HMO plans, each commercial insurance company, whether it's Aetna, Cigna, United, will have a subset of plan type called HMO. I forget what it stands for, but that set of type of insurance plans don't have out-of-network benefits. What if I've been seeing a client since January and I just got signed up with Thrizer this week? Should I be talking about this with them now? Yes, absolutely. The reason being is if you've been seeing them for sessions throughout the year or even prior years, you'll want to make sure that they have submitted superbills for those prior sessions, right? Even if you start using Thrizer or any kind of, offering them superbills today, you'll want to make sure they've received credit towards their deductible or even towards reimbursement for all those prior sessions. So there's something we can help with. I'll kind of talk about that later, but yes, absolutely. The way to do it is issue them a superbill for all the prior sessions they've had with you so that then, they can get credit towards that. Okay, there are some questions around the benefits calculator. How many sessions do they pay out of pocket? I'll get to all of that because I think there might be some people who don't fully understand the process yet. So we'll talk about that and then I'll definitely make sure to come back to those questions. This is actually a great question, so I'm going to answer this right now. How often should we give superbills? So that's totally up to you and the client. I know there are EHRs, like for example, Simple Practice, that automatically sends clients a superbill on the first of the month. So I got my superbill yesterday for all the sessions I've had. So that automatic thing, if that's easier for you, so you don't have to keep track of when to send them superbills, that's a great feature if you do use something like Simple Practice or other EHRs that have that automated. If you don't have that in your EHR, it's really up to the client. Usually what I've heard is once a month is standard, that the clinician provides it to their client. But maybe a client wants to be getting reimbursements much faster, right? If you think about giving them a superbill at the end of the month, that means they have fronted money for all those sessions that they saw this past month. And if they've been seeing you weekly and it's $200, they're out $800 before they get reimbursements, which they would get, 4 weeks later. So they're actually out $1,600, right? So it really comes down to having a conversation with the client of, when do you plan to submit these super bills? What would be most supportive? Of course, it comes down to your bandwidth as well. So finding a medium ground, maybe every 2 weeks could be helpful, but once a month is typically the standard that I've seen. Awesome. So I'm going to keep going in the interest of time, but thank you all for the questions. Keep it coming. Awesome. So let's go into super bills. So if we're trying to think about how do clients access these benefits, it's through super bills. And maybe before we jump into that, I always like to level set of, hey, how is in-network different from out-of-network at a broad stroke, right? Because I think a lot of clinicians who come into these webinars are actually people who are interested in going private pay, or they've just, transitioned to private pay. And so billing is actually completely different for the two worlds. And so I like to kind of level set with that. So in-network therapy, as most of you are familiar with, insurance sets the rates that clinicians charge. So, they'll dictate, okay, you get paid 100 or 120 or whatever for your sessions. And then clients pay a copay. That is kind of what is included in their insurance plan. It could be a $30 copay, $40 copay, whatever it might be the case. Clinicians will submit the claim and then wait for reimbursement themselves from insurance, right? And so that's how that works. The rate is set by insurance, and then clinicians wait for reimbursement. Those are kind of the two big things in terms of how it affects you. Out-of-network therapy or private pay therapy is clinicians set your own rate, right? You're not dictated by insurance. You're not paneled with insurance companies. You set the rate that you want to charge based on what you think is fair and reasonable for your services. And then, clients will need to submit their own super bill and then wait for reimbursement. So the client has a session with you, you give them a super bill, they take the super bill, they submit it to insurance. After they submit it to insurance, about 4 to 6 weeks is the time frame where they will receive a reimbursement check to the address they have on file. And so it's not going to be similar to how an in-network you're not paid immediately. In the out-of-network session therapy as well, clients are not paid immediately for sessions. They'll need to submit that super bill and usually wait 6 weeks for it. And so this is the thing that we're talking about, right? We're talking about the right-hand side of out-of-network therapy and how does super bills work then? So what is a super bill? It's basically an invoice that you provide to your clients that they submit to their insurance company for receiving reimbursement. So, what typically goes on a super bill? Again, your EHR might already have a template and like an automated service to create the super bill. So it'll probably take care of it. But if it doesn't have it, and regardless, it's important to know what goes on a super bill. So, obviously information about yourself as clinician, practice information, your NPI, tax ID, address, contact info, client information. So it'll have their name, date of birth, and contact information. Diagnosis code. So this is a question we often get, even if you're submitting for out-of-network services. And if they want reimbursement for sessions, you will need to include a diagnosis code. If the client doesn't want you to include a diagnosis code, unfortunately, insurance requires that for reimbursement purposes. So you would kind of need to have that conversation with them of, do you want to go the reimbursement route or do you want to remain completely private, in which case you can't submit super bills, right? So diagnosis code is absolutely important and necessary to go on a super bill. And then the list of sessions with dates of service, CPT code, and then session fee is what will go on it. So for example, if you're giving them a super bill once a month and they see you weekly, it'll have 4 sessions on it, the 4 session dates, what CPT code did you use for each of the sessions, and then how much did you charge for each of the sessions. So that there's kind of a standard template that is there. And if you just look it up, you'll see that standard templates that's usually included there as well. And you would just use that for super bills. So that's essentially what a super bill is. Now let's kind of understand, I like to paint the picture of what a super bill process looks like from a client's perspective, right? Because a lot of times, especially when I started going to therapy, first, several years ago, I didn't kind of share my process with my therapist. And so my therapist kept giving me super bills, and she, you know, rightfully assumed that I was submitting super bills, but I stopped submitting super bills because the process was very cumbersome and intimidating for me as a client. I didn't want to deal with insurance. So here's typically the client process that they go through to submit super bills. So of course, the client pays your full session rate up front, and then the clinician issues that super bill. The client will need to submit the super bill to their insurance company, and each insurance company is different. So sometimes they'll ask you to fax it in. Sometimes it'll be an online portal. Sometimes it's an email that you will need to send with the super bill. So the client would need to figure out how to do that. Then usually, you know, unfortunately, insurance isn't developed enough to say, okay, here's an online portal. You can log in and see that, yes, we've received your super bill, and, you know, we're working on it. And here's when you're going to get your reimbursement. Here's how much reimbursement you're going to get. They don't publish any of that. There's absolutely no visibility into it. So typically, you know, a client will need to follow up if it's been 4 weeks and they're like, where's my check? Typically a client will follow up. And then finally, you know, the client receives the reimbursement check and then they deposit it into their bank account. So that's usually the process that it takes. To be fair, once they do this once, they will get a hang of it, right? There are people who've been submitting super bills for years. They figured it out. They know how to do it. And it's not, you know, an intimidating process for them. It can feel intimidating in the beginning, but if they've successfully been reimbursed using super bills, amazing. And it can be a very reliable process for people to be doing so. So it's kind of stressful in the beginning, but people figure it out. But that's the end-to-end super bill process. So before I jump into how are reimbursements determined, let me kind of flip back here and answer questions. Okay. Okay, so if my tax ID is my SSN, does it need to be provided? Yes, I believe that you will need to include some kind of identifier, like a tax ID or a social security number on super bills. Does a client need to have a physician referral to be eligible for out-of-network benefits? No, you don't need to have a referral. The client would just need to have out-of-network benefits in their plan. And so that's basically what they would need to have. There's no kind of referral needed for that. But most of my clients will have a high out-of-network deductible, so they wouldn't be reimbursed anything, correct? So we'll get to that piece. Yes, some plans have really high deductibles, and in that case, that is true. But other plans have deductibles between the 1,000 to 3,000 range, which is usually the average that we've seen for most plans. And so they do become eligible for reimbursement, let's say within 3 to 4 months of sessions. But they do have to pay the full rate before then. I read about instant reimbursement on Thrizer. I read about copays. Yes, we'll absolutely cover how Thrizer fits into this whole process. I've kind of kept that towards the end, but it's important kind of to learn how the whole process works without Thrizer, and then we'll get into Thrizer shortly after. Courtesy billing. Yep, we'll talk about how courtesy billing works with Thrizer. Awesome. Does providing a super bill for the client, does that subject the therapist to audits, record requests from that insurance company? That's a great question. So, and I'll kind of end it on that question before we keep going forward. Rarely is the answer to that. So, it's definitely not as common as it is in network settings, right, in terms of audits and requests for documentation and things like that. But I will also say that it's not, I won't say it's never, right? So rarely does it happen based on what we've seen. It's a very, very small subset of, you know, claims that have, you know, come back with, oh, I need more information. There would probably be like 0.01% of the claim volume that we submit. And so it's not something that happens very frequently. It also happens, I'm trying to remember which insurance companies have had it in the past. I think Blue Cross Blue Shield had it. I think Cigna had it for a while. There's kind of phases where insurance companies try to make it really hard. And so they'll be like, okay, we're going to kind of try to make this much harder. But If you do go through something like Thrizer, we'll take care of that for you. But yes, audits can happen, but it's very infrequent in the out-of-network setting. So it's not very common. Okay, so let's keep moving along here. So how are reimbursement rates determined? So this is a question that we get a lot, and this is a part that I like to educate on the most, or kind of talk about the most, because I think this is where things get really confusing. It's not something you can just kind of Google and find out on your own. So we'll really break down the math here, and I feel like it's helpful to kind of understand this, because if you do get questions, or for your own understanding, you know, it can be helpful to figure out how you know, insurance companies navigate reimbursement rates. So what is a client's responsibility in the out-of-network setting? So obviously in-network, they just pay a copay. Out-of-network, the most important formula that you'll want to kind of walk away with is this one right here. So clinician's rate minus insurance reimbursement is the client's responsibility. So let's do a quick example. Let's say you charge $200. Insurance may only reimburse $120 of it, right? So then the client responsibility is $80. We'll come back to kind of what is insurance reimbursement, right? Because that's what we're trying to parse out here, what goes into that number of that 120. But that's the basic formula that you'll want to remember. If your rate is higher and insurance reimbursement stays the same, the client responsibility goes up, right? If your rate is lower, insurance reimbursement might go down a little bit, and ultimately, though, the client responsibility might be lower. So the one that, you know, we get a lot of questions on, how do I make sure that the client is only paying $30, right? Because I want to keep it accessible for this client, because maybe this client is struggling financially. The only part that you'll be able to tweak in this formula is clinician rate, because insurance reimbursement is something that you have absolutely no control over, right? So if you want to play around with the numbers and say, okay, maybe what if I charge them $180? Will that, you know, drop their session rate to $60? But, you know, things like that. So that's where, you know, this formula can be really helpful to understand properly, because this is kind of what the most important thing is in terms of what is their out-of-pocket cost. Now, let's really kind of dive deep into what makes up that insurance reimbursement. How do they calculate that 120 or 100 or whatever it might be? This is kind of the biggest thing, is out-of-network reimbursements vary by individual clients and individual plans. This is the most frustrating thing ever, because you'll see clients with very similar plans, if not the same plan, and very similar demographic information and everything, but they will have different reimbursement amounts. Again, I think it's on purpose. It's not a transparent process. Insurance companies are kind of fully determining this whole thing. And so the question we get a lot is, why is it different? Honestly, it just is the insurance company that's doing that. Each insurance reimbursement, though, is broken down into these three portions that we'll dive deep into now. So there is a deductible usually. There's this thing called allowed amounts, and there's this thing called coinsurance. And so we'll jump into what those things are right now. As many of you have already referenced in the chat, deductibles are usually, you know, the amount that is dictated in that insurance plan that needs to be fully paid out of pocket before reimbursements kick in. And that is super important to remember. So there might be a deductible of $1,000. There might be a deductible of $2,000. There might be a deductible of $10,000, right? And so this is where I was saying the common plans that we see that isn't a high deductible plan. Of course, when open enrollment comes around, clients and, you know, individuals in general might opt for a high deductible plan, because they're like, I'm healthy, I don't need to be, you know, I don't go to the hospital or the doctor that much, I'm going to opt for a high deductible plan. In that case, that will become tricky with out-of-network benefits, because if they have a $10,000 deductible, they're not going to meet that, even if they see you every day. On the flip side, the non-high deductible or the standard plans, usually the deductible that we see is between $1,000 to $3,000. So that is the, you know, range that we see deductibles in. So we'll do the math here, right? If we say if it is 1,000, or, you know, between 1,000 and 3,000, how many sessions then does it take to be able to meet that deductible? And that's the math that we'll do in a second here. But just to dive deeper, client is responsible for your full session fee until they meet that deductible. So they're going to be paying the 200, 200, 200 until that deductible is met in full. Deductibles reset every year. Very important point here. The reason why, even if a client has, let's say, a $5,000 deductible, but they're seeing you weekly, maybe by the end of the year, come November or October or November, they meet it and they're happy and they start receiving reimbursements, but it does reset. So unfortunately, come January again, they'll have to restart that whole process. And so that's why high deductibles can become really nerve-wracking and stressful because of that reason. And then this piece here, we'll come back to it in a second, but just keep it kind of in the back of your mind here. Only the allowed amount is applied towards their deductible. And so we'll break that down in a second here. So that brings me to my next question here. What is an allowed amount? So an allowed amount is the kind of the black box part of this whole process. This is not published in a client's insurance plan. If they call their insurance plan, there's a 50-50 chance that the insurance rep is going to tell the client, here's what your allowed amount is. Most times, even if a client calls or a provider calls the insurance company, they're not going to disclose what the allowed amount is. And so basically what it is just the maximum amount that the insurance company is willing to reimburse for each out-of-network therapy session. What does that mean then, right? So again, as I mentioned, allowed amounts are complete black box, and you'll only know it in full actuality or accuracy after you hear back on the first claim. So we'll submit the first claim and then we'll hear back, okay, here's how, here's what the actual reimbursement amount is going to be. Allowed amounts, this is a question I get often. So allowed amounts do not determine how much you as a clinician can charge. If we go back to that first slide in this section, right, you can charge whatever you want since you are out of network. You're private pay, you're not getting involved in insurance dictating how much you can charge. So you can charge 200, 250, 300, whatever you feel like is fair and reasonable for your sessions. And then the reimbursement rate is that middle portion that we saw. That is what allowed amounts will actually dictate. It is just how much is the client going to get reimbursed, not how much you as a clinician can charge for that session. And then the client responsibility, they may be responsible for a portion of that allowed amount, and that's called a coinsurance. And so we'll dive into that in the next session or next slide here. But it's not even like if the allowed amount is 120, they're not going to reimburse all of the 120, because the client might be responsible for 20% of that. And that's another way that, insurance companies are sneaky and they end up paying much less than they can seem from the beginning. So let's quickly chat about coinsurance here. So coinsurance is the percentage of the allowed amount that the client is responsible for. So diving deeper here, it is based off of the allowed amount and not the clinician's rate. Again, I understand this can feel really confusing and I empathize with that. So we'll do an example in a second, but a lot of times, if this rings a bell from your past experiences, a client might come to you and say, oh, my insurance company is going and my co-insurance is 30%. A lot of times people will say, great, so my session rate is $200. Since you're going to get 30% back from insurance, that means that, since you're only going to be responsible for 30% of the 200, you're only going to pay $60. And that's not the case, right? Because the 30% is of the allowed amount. It is not of your rate. And so that'll make a little bit more sense when we do an example. This is something you'll find directly in an insurance plan. So, along with the deductible, coinsurance is published in an insurance plan directly. And then the typical range we see is between 20 to 50% in terms of the deductibles. So before I kind of jump into questions, I will do a quick example and then I'll answer questions, and I'll pause for a lot of questions so we can kind of drive this point home. So what is the reimbursement amount then? This is the question that we first started this conversation with. So let's start with this example, right? Let's say that the insurance company says, the allowed amount is $150, coinsurance is 20%. What does that mean? That means that insurance reimbursement, the portion, the check that the client will receive is $120, even if the allowed amount is $150, which is technically what is the maximum they're willing to reimburse. It really isn't that, right? Because they're only reimbursing $120. That is 80% of the $150, which is $120. So then of this allowed amount, the client is actually responsible for $30. But as you can imagine, that this portion is just based off of the allowed amount so far. The clinician might be charging $200. What then is the client's responsibility, right? So let's do a full example here to kind of bring it all together. Here are, the different things that we're going to be looking at. So clinician rate is $200 in this example. The deductible is $1,500. Allowed amount is $150, and then a coinsurance is 20%. So what does that actually mean? That means that pre-deductible, the client will pay $200 per session for the first 10 sessions, right? And why is it 10? It's because only $150 gets applied towards that deductible. That was that little disclaimer that I had included on one of the slides. The question here could be, okay, why isn't $200 applied then to the deductible? Because that's what the client is paying out of pocket. Again, the insurance company is only going to honor up to the allowed amount. So it'll be $150 that gets applied towards the deductible. So in that case, if their deductible is $1,500, it takes 10 sessions for the client to be paying $200, and they meet that. And so if you think about 10 sessions, if they're seeing you weekly, that's in about 3 months. If they're seeing you bi-weekly, that's in about 6 months, right? So it does take time, but after that is done, then they start receiving reimbursements. So client then receives that $120 reimbursement per session after that initial $1,500 is met. So instead of then, right, so it's 80% of that $150 allowed amount. Therefore, the client is responsible for $80 per session. And this is good news, right? Because the client only pays $80 while you earn $200 for that session. Yes, they had to go through the deductible period, but, after those, the flip side of that is if they hadn't accessed their out-of-network benefits, they would have been paying $200 in the totality of the year, versus here, at least for the first, 3 to 4 months, maybe they're paying that $200, but then moving forward, they're only paying $80. And of course, this is one example. Sometimes the insurance reimbursement might be $150, sometimes it might be $100. So the point is that it'll end up being about 60 to 70% that they get back based on their individual insurance plan. So I will pause here. I kind of talked really fast. So sorry about that, but let me hop into the questions. Okay. These are all the old questions. That's all. Can clawbacks happen without a network? Clawbacks are very rare. Clawbacks do not happen. What is more common is that the claim gets denied, and in that case, the client is responsible for that session fee, right? So rarely do we ever see, actually, I don't think I've ever seen this, at least for the Thrizer claims, is that the claim is submitted, they've approved it, and then they come back and say, no, you owe it back. It happens probably very rarely, and we haven't seen it in any of the sessions. Can we do sliding scale for out-of-network clients? Yes. And so the way that works is that, let's say your standard rate is $200. And that's kind of what I was talking about in terms of doing the math, right? So let's say 200, their reimbursement's going to be 120, so they pay $80 out of pocket, but you want to keep it at 30, right? So in that case, or maybe you want to keep it at even, $0, then you figure out what that allowed amount is on top of that coinsurance, right? Then you charge them that 150 or 120, and then doing the math, you'll be able to figure out, okay, here's what that reimbursement amount, or copay amount will actually come out to be after reimbursement kicks in. The important point to note here is if you charge, let's say the allowed amount is 150, right? If you charge 100, they're only going to reimburse 100. They're not going to reimburse 150, right? So if we take this exact example that we're looking at on the screen, clinician rate is 100, let's say. Even if the allowed amount is 150, if you charge 100 and the client has a 20% coinsurance, the client is still responsible for $20, right? So they'll cover up to the 100, client is responsible for 20% of the 100, therefore the client is responsible for $20. So there's honestly no way that you can, probably the only way is, it becomes mathematically difficult, but it's difficult to get the client cost down to $0. Though it does happen. That could happen if the client doesn't have a coinsurance percentage, basically. And there are plans that have that, but they will still end up paying, $20, $30, which is pretty comparable to the in-network copay they pay. So yes, that's how sliding scale would fit into the out-of-network world. Is there a separate deductible amount for mental health care and medical care, or is it all wrapped up into one deductible? There is a separate deductible for, like, I believe, I forget what the bucket is called, but it's therapy services. So mental health therapy, physical therapy, occupational therapy, all of those kind of have one bucket. It is different from, primary care, optometry, and things like that. So that's a separate out-of-network bucket. The challenge with all of the math is on average, a client only attends about 12 to 20 sessions, so they end up paying deductible before benefits start. That is true. That is very true. And so I'll be completely transparent. This is helpful for clients who are seeing you weekly or biweekly. If a client sees you monthly, if a client sees you, even less infrequently, then it honestly will not be very helpful for them. But it is a reliable resource for clients who have good out-of-network benefits and they see you for consistent sessions throughout the year. So that would be kind of the best candidate for out-of-network benefits. Can you take them off of the sliding scale once they've met their deductible? Yes, that's actually a good point. So we do see that clinicians do that. So what does that mean? That means that, let's say that your rate is $200. Instead of, to make it easier on the client to be able to afford your services until that deductible is met, you can charge them a lower rate. So you can charge them $100 as they're working towards that deductible. Once they meet that deductible, you can raise your rates, right? And they might still end up paying much less than the $100, right? Because their reimbursement starts kicking in. So there's nothing unethical about that. Also, insurance companies are not going to come back and say, oh, why did you increase the rate from 100 to 200 now? They're not keeping track of it. They're not going to do it. There's nothing unethical about that. So you can raise your rate while the client still pays probably less than $100. So that is a totally fair kind of process or approach that you can take, and a lot of people do that. That's pretty much all the questions. I think I've answered some of the other ones here. So let's keep going. We have about 10 minutes here, so I do want to get to the tips and tricks here. So here's kind of, now that you know what out-of-network benefits are, you understand the general process. Here's kind of then what do you do with all this information, right? Here are the actionable things that you can take away from this webinar. Add out-of-network benefits to your website and intake process. So here might be some language that you include onto your website if you don't already have this. So you could say, while I don't accept your insurance, you may have out-of-network benefits in your insurance plan. This means you can get back a large portion of your session fees as reimbursement. I'm happy to provide you with superbills, right? That can feel jumbly for a client when they're reading it, like, what does all of that mean? But at least they know that there is a way for me to pay less for your session, right? And once they come in, they have that consult call with you, that's when you take the time to talk them through the superbill process, right? You could say, I'm going to provide you a superbill, or here is a superbill after they've had a month worth of services with you. You could say, you'll need to submit it to your insurance company, check to see whether it's through fax, email, or portal. Once you do so, it takes about 6 weeks for them to process your claim, and then you'll receive a reimbursement check in the mail. So make sure your address is correct on file. So just kind of talking them through that process can be really helpful. I completely understand that probably the reason you decided to go out of network is because you don't want to get involved in insurance stuff. Totally fair, but just kind of saying something like this could be really, really helpful in them just feeling like, okay, I am supported. I understand what the process is, and I'm going to take it forward. Tip 3 is automate the whole process with Thrizer. And so this is where the plug is going to be for Thrizer. Thrizer isn't just another company in terms of fitting into your workflow. We are truly trying to change the whole process and make it so much easier for both clients and clinicians. And so, myself and my co-founder, Ronak, founded the company on this mission that, we've navigated superbills ourselves. We're longtime therapy goers, and it was such a mess to deal with superbills, to put it lightly. And so that's really where Thrizer was born from. It's from our own experiences, kind of interviews with a bunch of clinicians and clients of, hey, where do you get stuck in this whole process, right? And so that's where, Thrizer can be really helpful for you. So let's recap this end-to-end superbill process, right? So as you remember, client pays the session fee, you issue a superbill, they submit the superbill, and then they wait 4 to 6 weeks for that check in the mail. With Thrizer, you kind of eliminate this entire process, and it takes one step. And this is how you charge the client through Thrizer's payment platform, which is how we fit into your workflow. So you can think of us similar to like a Stripe or a Square. We would charge your clients through Thrizer to collect your fees. And once they have met their deductible, they just get charged a copay or a co-insurance for that session. So how does that work, right? It's because we handle everything else in the back end. So step number 1 is always, you want to verify their benefits upfront. We offer you a free benefits checker for that. So you would just plug in their date of birth, insurance information, and be able to get that upfront verification of, yes, this person has out-of-network benefits. Here's what that deductible looks like, and here's how much they can expect back from reimbursement. Or if, we also kind of give them that extra step of here's how much your copay would be after you have met your deductible. Then every time you charge a client through the Thrizer payment platform, a claim is automatically submitted to insurance. So there's no need for you to issue them super bills, have them submit that on their own, have them call insurance. None of that. We'll automatically submit it for them. You're actually just charged a 3% credit card fee. There's no monthly fees, contracts, minimum number of clients you need to have. You're just paying the exact, 3% credit card fee that you're probably already paying on your EHR, or if you're using Stripe or Square. So you're just paying the 3%. So we automatically submit the claim. Once the client has met their deductible, they just pay the portion that they owe. So for example, in that scenario that we were looking at where you charge $200 and insurance reimbursement is $120 and their session fee is $80, right? Instead of them paying you $200, waiting for $120 check in the mail, they just pay the $80 difference, right? So it's $200 minus $120, $80 is what they pay. We charge a 5% fee of your rate. So it's $10 in that case, 5% of $200. So they're paying $90 for your session instead of $200. We still cover the rest of your fees to make you whole upfront. So that's the important piece, right? We don't want you to be waiting for insurance to reimburse us back either, because that's, again, not why you went out of network for. So we will cover the difference. We would cover the $120 difference in that example. You would receive that every Friday. So, you make charges through Thrizer. All charges that you make by Thursday end of day gets paid out to you that Friday to your bank account. We wouldn't have received the reimbursement by then, and that's totally fine. We'll essentially wait for reimbursement on the client's behalf. Another question we get is, okay, what if the claim gets denied? Am I going to be clawed back the $200? Is the client going to be charged the $120 difference? The answer is no. If a client has already paid that copay, we are not going to back charge them the remaining session fee, even if the claim gets denied. We will cover the difference for that session. It's on us to resubmit that claim, figure out what happened. In most cases, we're able to get it resolved and we get our reimbursement. If for whatever reason we don't get our reimbursement, we're going to have to cover the difference for that session. We'll just let the client know for future sessions, hey, the company's not, insurance is not honoring your out-of-network benefits, please follow up with them to see what's happening. We've already kind of done our due diligence, but you will be responsible for your full session fee moving forward, right? So they'll always have that safety net for prior sessions. And this rarely happens again. Like, it's more so that the first claim gets denied and we'll have to figure out, okay, what's happening and, why is that the case? It's rarely that a client's been getting reimbursements and then randomly, the claim gets denied. And though it does happen, of course, it's insurance, but it's pretty rare. But if that does happen, we do offer that safety net. So yeah, that's basically where Thrizer fits into the whole process. So if we're kind of thinking about the new client funnel, right? Of course, you are doing all the right things to attract clients. You are doing all the right things to retain clients. We really want to focus on that middle section right there, which is how do we actually convert clients? How do we get them to start sessions with us? That's where out-of-network benefits fit in, and that's also where Thrizer fits in, right? And so how does that look? Here's how the language on your website and your intake process would change. So it would be something like, while I don't accept your insurance, you may have out-of-network benefits in your insurance plan that could save you a large portion of our session fees. I'm happy to take care of the entire insurance stress for you, that is verifying your benefits and submitting claims for you via Thrizer. You can also just pay a copay for sessions after meeting your deductible, right? Something like that, where it's like, oh, okay, like that's interesting. And then when they come to your consult call or they start sessions with you, you can explain them a little bit more. And we offer you kind of a how to explain Thrizer to your clients guide. So, I'll make sure to include that in kind of the resources that I share with you. But that can be a really handy guide where it has like this blurb, something similar like this to put on your website, to put on your Psychology Today. And then finally, that email template that you can share with your client that explains what is Thrizer, how does it work, how do you get set up, what are the pricing, fees and things like that. So yeah, that's pretty much that piece. I will wrap up here with this before I come back to questions really quickly at the end. But that's pretty much what I wanted to cover in this webinar. You will receive an email from me. It'll include this webinar recording. It'll also include an out-of-network benefits cheat sheet. So if you don't want to rewatch all of the webinar, it's basically a one-pager that goes through, okay, what are deductibles? What are allowed amounts? Blah, 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 that whole process. So you can just kind of review that at a glance. And then also a free trial for attending this webinar. So, I'll make sure to share the free trial link with you if you want to try us out. Or you can use the code webinar when you sign up. Or if you've just signed up, you can absolutely just email me. You've seen my email, sanjana@thrizer.com. Just email me and I'll make sure to get that, code and promo applied to your account if you've just signed up for it. And so you will receive waived credit card fees. You won't pay the 3% for your first $1,500 in charges. So that's pretty much it that I have for you. I'll stay on a couple minutes longer to answer questions, but just the final little housekeeping tip here, look out for an email from me. Apparently sometimes the email goes to spam, so definitely check spam later today as well. If you haven't received an email today, please reach out to me tomorrow. Sanjana@thrizer.com. I will make sure to send the email your way so that you have all the resources. So if you don't have any questions or you don't want to stay to kind of hear the questions, feel free to hop off. Thank you so much for joining. These are really fun for me to do. But of course, you have my email there. You can reach out to me with any and all questions. Thank you. All right. Let me now go to the questions. I see a question from Amy. I have a client with the maximum daily allowed amount. I've also heard that some insurance plans have maximum number of sessions allowed per day. Can you discuss what you've seen? Yes. So most commonly what I've seen is that there is a limitation of only submitting one claim per day, right? So this becomes relevant where, let's say that you have an individual therapy session and then you have a family therapy session on the same day right after. that can become a little tricky because most commonly what we've seen is only one claim is approved per day. You know, that makes absolutely no sense. I completely understand because they're for completely different CPT codes, but that is a limitation that I have seen very frequently. So if at all possible, you maybe have the individual psychotherapy session one day and have the family therapy session the next day. So that, you know, there might be those cases. We could absolutely try to submit both claims on the same day and see what happens. But if it does get denied, then, you know, we usually recommend that you split it across 2 different days. So that's that. So is everything instant with Thrizer? Yes, pretty much. So, you know, for the way that it'll feel for you is as you're using Stripe or Square, right? So what you're doing is we'll have all of the information kind of populated in your onboarding process. So we'll make sure that you enter, you know, of course, everything we need from you for the claims, right? The NPI, tax ID, contact information, all of those things. We'll have that already on file for you. Then for each client that you onboard, we'll make sure that, you know, we get their insurance information, payment method, which is what they're going to be using to pay for your sessions, and then a diagnosis code, which gets saved, and also a CPT code, which gets saved. So every time you charge a client, we basically have all of the information we need to populate superbills for them. And so it's instantaneous. You charge them for a session, the claim goes to insurance, and that's pretty much it. And then you get paid every Friday. Yes. So from our perspective, it's 3% of charged fee. That's correct. From the client's perspective, it's their responsibility plus anything over the allowed amount. Yep. And 5% that they would pay. Do they see this explicitly outlined at checkout? $200 charge, $150 allowed amount. Yes. So basically, when they're charged for a session, they will receive an email that says you've been charged for the session. And they also can see it in their portal, which says, here's how much you've been charged. In their benefit verification is when we will split out, here's what your deductible is, here's what your co-insurance is. But we don't split out the math, if that's the question here, of like, if they get charged $89, let's say, it's not going to split it out into 80 is for, you know, the non-Thrizer fees and $9 is the Thrizer fees. They'll just receive one kind of charge, but they will know that they've opted into a 5% fee because they have to opt into it. So they will be, you know, they'll know that they have to pay that 5% fee. And also in the onboarding email that you'll share with them, we include just a link to the pricing page. So they should be fully aware that they are being charged that fee if they choose to go the copay route. Do you work with clinicians for affiliate links? Yeah, so it's basically if you have a good experience on Thrizer and you want to recommend it to your peer, you actually will be able to send them a referral link. So what that gives you is waived credit card fees again. So every time a peer signs up with your link, you get 2,500 in waived credit card fees, and they also get 2,500 in waived credit card fees. There's no limit to this, so you can invite all of your peers. And so every time a peer that you recommend to Thrizer signs up with your link, you will see that 2,500 promo applied to your account directly each time. So is there a cost on top of just a 3% credit card fee for using Thrizer? No, just the 3% credit card fee. So it's pay as you go. You know, if you want to try it out with a few clients first, see how it works, then bring in your entire caseload, that's totally possible too. A related question that comes to mind for that is, you can also use Thrizer for self-pay clients. So let's say there are clients who don't want to go through insurance or don't have out-of-network benefits. You could still use Thrizer for them to charge them. So in that world, you're still paying 3%, which is comparable to any other billing platform, and they aren't charged any fees. So, you know, especially if you're a fully private pay practice and you don't have any in-network clients, it might be easier for you to centralize all of your billing on Thrizer. So you can just keep track of, okay, here are the, you don't even need to keep track of it, but, you know, here are the clients that are using their out-of-network benefits and here are the self-pay clients, because that's just an easy toggle that you can pick. I'm assuming you will send us a link on how to enroll with Thrizer as a therapist. Yep, that'll be included in the email that I share with you. Does the client sign up with Thrizer or the therapist sign up with Thrizer? So both. And the way it works is you will sign up as a therapist first, and then from your portal, you will invite your client. And so they'll receive an email directly to their inbox. They don't need to go through the website or anything, but they'll receive an email saying, you know, your doctor or your therapist is inviting you to use Thrizer, and then they just have to create an account. So that's what they would do. Is it possible for the client to go through Thrizer without therapist involvement? Yes, so that is where our superbill uploads comes into play. So that's a separate offering we have that's not the payment platform, but the superbill uploads process basically is that you know, you give them superbills, they create their own profile on Thrizer, they verify their own benefits, and then they upload their superbills. In that world, there isn't an instant reimbursement option. They will have to wait for reimbursements. So that is the difference there. So there's no Thrizer pay or copay option, but that is totally a avenue if you want to stay completely out of the process. Am I understanding correctly that the clients get reimbursed right away? Yes. So if they have met their deductible, they are getting reimbursed right away because they're just paying the portion that they owe. Does your out-of-network verification come from Availity, or you have your own platform? Yeah, so yes, we are integrated with Availity and Change Healthcare. So that's where the you know, information, the benefits verification comes directly from. Again, an important point to note here is that the allowed amount is not published even on Availity, right? So the allowed amount comes from us internally. It is just data that we've gathered. We'll give them a number based on similar plans that we've worked with in the past, right? So if it's a Blue Cross Blue Shield plan that is similar to what this client is entering, then we'll say, okay, the allowed amount we're plugging in there as an estimate is for other plans that look similar to that. But the deductible and co-insurance will come directly from Availity. So that's a great question. I missed your earlier remark on the 5% fee. On what amount does the client pay the 5%? Yes, it's of the session fee or the clinician's rate. It's not on the reimbursement amount. It's so if you charge them $200 for the session, they're paying 5% of that. I just kept seeing that if you do a sliding scale for out-of-network reimbursement, insurance will lower the allowed amount. Is this an urban legend? Yeah, they won't lower the allowed amount, but the reimbursement that you get will be lower, right? And that's the $100 example that we were talking about. So, you know, even if the allowed amount is $150, right? Technically, you can charge up to $150. But if you're only charging them $100, then they only reimburse $100 and the client will still have a 20% co-insurance. So they're still paying $20. So in that world, you're technically not maximizing the rate or the insurance reimbursement that they can get. But the flip side of that is if you're charging $150, right, and they cover $150 of it, there's still, the client is still responsible for 20% of $150, right? 20% of $150 is, I think, $30. So they're still paying more than the $20, right? They're not paying less. They're technically paying $10 more, but the point is you're still receiving much higher rate. And so it's not that the allowed amount is going up and down, it's that how much, you know, they're paying out is based on the combination of the allowed amount and the co-insurance. So it can seem that way, if that makes sense without getting too nuanced. Okay, and this will be the last question I answer here, but you can always reach out to me with more. How do you handle things that maybe aren't covered by insurance? Say, for example, court-ordered therapy. That is a nuanced question. If you have a specific client that you're dealing with for that, reach out to me, and I'll get you an answer on that. Typically, there are set CPT codes that a client will get reimbursed for based on their insurance plan. So if there is a set CPT code, then, you know, we can submit claims for them. But if it's not covered by insurance, then likely they won't get, you can't submit a super bill for it. But as long as it is a covered service, then we can. And that's something we can check for you if you would like. Is copay used in the out-of-network terminology? Great question. No, it's not. And we say copay in the Thrizer world, copay, coinsurance, reduced rate, whatever you want to message to your client. There is technically no copay just in out-of-network, right? Because the only two terms you'll hear in out-of-network is the session fee, which is what the clinician is charging. There's also, of course, the allowed amount and deductible and things like that. But then it's the out-of-pocket cost. So that's usually what the term is, I guess, for the difference between the clinician rate and the reimbursement is technically the out-of-pocket cost. The reason we say copay, which can get confusing, I totally understand, is just because copay is a term that clients tend to understand, right? They'll be like, oh, I'm only paying an $80 copay or a $60 copay. It's easier for them to wrap their heads around, which is why we use copay internally. But you can also message it as coinsurance or reduced rate. That's just in the Thrizer context. It's not generally in terms of out-of-network. Awesome. Well, thank you so much, everyone, for staying with me for an extra 11 minutes. I hope this was helpful. If you do have questions, please reach out to me at sanjana@thrizer.com. And you just keep an eye out for a recording and an email resource from me. So thank you, everyone. Have a great weekend.